Before my recent playthrough of Pokémon Alpha Sapphire, I had the impression that Hoenn was a bland region with an uninspiring selection of Pokémon. But now having played Alpha Sapphire, I've realized that I could not have been more mistaken. Not only does ORAS add depth to the original's visuals and story, but it also fixes all of X and Y's problems. For example, Mega Evolution was underutilized in X and Y, as only 4 opposing trainers use the feature. It also only had a minimal role in the main story, as Karina, Gherkin, and Sycamore only vaguely discuss Mega Evolution's origin, and tell you that Mega Evolution can only be used by trainers who harness a strong bond with their Pokémon. Yet, you receive the Mega Ring only after defeating the second gym leader, when you've hardly accomplished anything, and weirdly there are only another 6 Pokemon available to Mega Evolve until you defeat the Pokemon League. The approach that ORAS takes is much more sensible, as you receive the Mega Ring after defeating the 5th gym leader, when you've actually had a chance to develop a strong bond with your Pokemon. And by that stage you would have already collected quite a few Mega Stones, as the majority of them are obtainable in the main story, and none of them are locked to an hour time slot. And while Mega Evolution is still not a prominent aspect of the main story, it at least complements Hoenn's focus on archaeology and legends very seamlessly. While the amount of trainers who use this feature has increased to 9, as unlike X and Y, the Elite Four get Mega Stones and become significantly stronger in the rematches. X and Y also wasn't that experimental with the 3D setting. There were a few cutscenes and interesting camera angles in the climax and at Lumio City, but overall it was just a top-down Pokemon game in the 3D chibi art style, whereas ORAS uses brighter colors and utilizes the 3D environment and cutscenes to emphasize Hoenn's vibrant nature. These cutscenes also transform some of the key story moments in the originals to be much more expressive and immersive, especially with the additional dialogue that ORAS provides, as the originals lack closure to Maxie and especially Archie's story, as he disappears after causing the extreme weather event, whereas in the remakes both leaders learn from their mistakes and agree to strive for a balanced environment that accommodates both people and Pokemon. Because as Archie said, when you seek to only accommodate humans or nature, you risk destroying the relationship between both. Hence, there needs to be a focus on a sustainable coexistence between nature and humanity. While this is a very sensible resolution, I did find it jarring how quickly the leaders give up immediately after achieving their dream world. Although they did explain the sudden change of heart better in the remakes than in the originals, as the leaders in the originals claimed that they wanted more land or water to introduce new Pokemon species. But that's illogical because nature would have no opportunity to adapt or evolve to an instantaneous event like flooding the whole Earth. Such an event would instead kill the already existing species. Whereas in the remakes, the leaders suggest that flooding the Earth or increasing the landmass is really just a guise for the underlying debate of whether we should revert the world back to its past state by protecting our natural sanctuaries instead of developing human infrastructure, or if we should embrace our technological future and prioritize human development at the cost of our natural world. With this added context, it makes much more sense why Archie and Maxie changed their mind, as the Primal Legendary destroys everything, including their desired people or Pokemon. The only thing that I still don't understand about the remakes is why didn't Shelly or Tabitha inform the leaders of the Weather Institute report before they went to the seafloor cavern, instead of trying to stop the leaders there? Despite that minor plot hole, I still think the remakes added much needed context and nuance to Archie and Maxie's ideologies that Gen 3 fans will appreciate. This game is also very accessible for people who started their journey in Pokemon X and Y though, as ORAS carries over and adds to the lower screen features to make this undoubtedly the best lower screen interface. The most important addition is Dex Nav that allows you to sneak up on a Pokemon and preview their abilities and moves. This incentivizes you to spend more time in routes and catch Pokemon, as a higher search level gives you a better preview. While Dex Nav also tracks how many Pokemon that you still have to catch in each route, that makes the overwhelming goal of completing the Pokédex feel much more achievable. The goal is even less overwhelming with the PSP being compatible with X and Y, while legendaries and non-home Pokemon are very easy to collect with the Mirage spots. But completing the Pokédex is just one of the many optional paths that this game offers, as contests have been improved since the originals with the addition of fan interactions and a small story that makes this feature much more immersive and motivating to participate in. Although the format can still be frustrating with how dependent it is on the random positioning of Pokemon and who receives the 5th star. There are some strategic elements though, as you can stumble your opponents and manipulate your position, but it would have been more engaging if there was a timing or rhythm mechanic that determines the success of the moves. But the somewhat underwhelming gameplay is why it's good that this feature is optional, as are all of the other features including secret bases. That more than compensates for the lack of trainer customization, as you can virtually design your own gym. Although it is disappointing that some of the items are locked behind unattainable ranks, as you need 1,000 flags to unlock Platinum, which would be so time consuming, especially since some people block their bases like they are the Trick House Master, and that is probably my favorite questline. But overall, ORAS offers so much freedom to customize your playthrough through these optional features, while also providing plenty of opportunities to take a break from the gym challenge and explore the region. The greatest example of this is after defeating the 5th gym leader, when you receive Surf and gain access to many of Hoenn's optional routes. And due to Hoenn's circular region design, it's very easy to navigate through, especially since the encounter rates are very low in water. And that's why I never understood the too much water complaint, as most of the water routes are completely optional and have lower encounter rates than the land routes. And the trainers are very easy to avoid, especially in the dive sections when they only battle you if you talk to them. There was also a decrease in hand holding compared to X and Y, as I was often wondering where Wily was and why I couldn't battle him, as he only battles you twice in the main story and May only 4 times before the Pokemon League. So whilst reducing the rival meetups definitely made the region more easy to travel through, it also simultaneously hurt the opportunity for character development, and also impacts the difficulty as there were not many difficult battles throughout the main story. The most difficult battles are probably against Winona and Norman, as Norman is able to overcome Slacking's greatest weakness of Truant through pressuring moves like Yawn and Encore, while Winona has a very capable defensive team due to all of her Pokemon having different dual types. The other gyms are much less difficult, as Watson still refuses to use a Manectric or have any answers to ground Pokemon, while Flannery has replaced the Slugma with a Numel since the originals, although that makes it even weaker to Water. And speaking of Water, why does Water Gym Leader Wallace use a Celio Sinking and Love Disc ahead of his Ludicolo that has access to Ice Beam that would help deal with opposing grass types? Overall, it's very disappointing that ORAS didn't adopt Emerald's increased difficulty and update the Gym Leader's team more. Although I did personally find these battles challenging enough, as I turned off the XP share and did a monotype bug playthrough. But with the XP share, this game is a breeze due to the lack of difficult battles throughout the main game, and this is especially disappointing after X and Y that was also very easy. But unlike X and Y that requires you to do a myriad of activities before you can access the post-game story, ORAS initiates the story immediately after you beat the champion, as Xena is stealing everyone's keystones and there is a meteoroid destined to hit the Earth in a few days. The Delta episode is also very quick to establish each character's perspective, to pose the main question of whether there can be peace without sacrifice, as the Draconoids believe that sacrificing lives is necessary to preserve peace and order, to the extent that Xena was working with Team Aqua or Magma to cause the extreme weather event that would kill thousands of people and Pokemon, just so that Rayquaza would arrive and dispose of the meteorite and preserve order. Whereas Cosmo and Steven are willing to have blood on their hands by transporting the meteorite to a parallel universe to ensure the safety of their own world. And despite there being lots of dialogue to explain these differing views, I found the storytelling really engaging, especially when Xena shares the legend of Rayquaza through a mural as he was sent the Sky Pillar. Traveling to space to battle Deoxys is obviously the highlight of the Delta episode, but what I'm more interested in discussing is the mysteries that were left unanswered, as there is no explanation for why the parallel universe even exists, nor why the Pokemon War didn't occur in the alternate universe. Was there some event during the Pokemon War that diverged the timeline into two universes? These questions could have some implications or be addressed in Pokemon ZA, but more likely this was just a convenient excuse for why there is Mega Evolution and why characters and towns have been redesigned. And the alternate universe might just be a metaphor for foreign countries, alluding to how destroying a country to preserve peace, for example, distinguishes the pain for one country, but it simultaneously destroys the livelihoods of people who are just like you or I, or in fact could be you or I. The other unanswered question though is, who is Asta? As Xena refers to this Whismur as a daughter, as many speculate Xena lost her daughter to the alternate universe, or there's a weird mystery dungeon thing going on here. I personally think that this Whismur is just a normal Pokemon that was given to Xena by the Draconoid Elder to comfort her during her grief. There's a discussion about letting go of a burden at the end of the chapter. Sounded like it was referring to more than just the burden of being a lawkeeper. I think it may have been referring to the burden of regret from losing a child. And director Amori stated in an interview that Asta used to be the lawkeeper, which would explain why Xena was unable to control Rayquaza, as she was a replacement, not the true lawkeeper. As she also admits while taking people's keystones that she couldn't become who she was supposed to be. Alternatively, be referring to Xena being unable to save Asta, or being a parent-like figure for her, as Xena was still the lawkeeper at this point and hadn't actually met Rayquaza or failed as a lawkeeper yet. So much like this quote, everything about Xena is just way too ambiguous to understand, and I can't really make out who Asta is. As Xena also says at the end of her letter that she's going to try and work out if she can forge a new beginning for something once lost. That could be referring to a number of things, including the Whismur that she leaves with the Elder, or maybe her previous life that was lost upon becoming the lawkeeper. But nevertheless, the ending montages after both the champion battle and the Delta episode are really heartwarming and provide important closure, while also leading into Pokemon Emerald. My favorite new addition in the remakes though isn't actually the Delta episode. That would be Mauville, that has been transformed from a generic abandoned ship in the originals to an area that is littered with lore and notes or puzzle pieces that put together shed a light on Hoenn's darker past, that involves a web of Hoenn's most influential figures. I'll summarize the main details as there are so many different sources of information scattered throughout the region, kind of like a treasure hunt, but if you disagree with anything you can let me know down below. So Raizio Cosmo worked for Mauville, a project designed to extract natural resources from the ocean. It was led by the Devon Corporation, although they weren't yet the massive company that they are in current-day Horn, so the conditions were very demanding. The slogans for a fun and cheerful workplace reflect this. No need to think, just work unceasingly. Give up your sanity and obey your superior's orders absolutely. While the Navy song says, "We won't take days off, tonight again sleepless," and you discover a Devon elixir in Raisio's room that reveals how this has been occurring, as the elixir enables you to work for days as you will never need another rest. Raisio's room also has letters from his son Takeo, and the letters detail Takeo's desire to see his father and the deteriorating relationship between Raisio and his partner. One of the letters explains that Takeo decided to become an astrologist after seeing the meteor shower with his father, and that whenever he looks at the stars he is reminded of his father, which is actually very reminiscent of Xena's comments that whenever she was so alone and full of uncertainty, she would turn her head to the stars so that her tears would never fall. Takeo's final present to his father was the skinny doll that we see Raisio later pick up, as Raisio was fired after losing an odd keystone that Spiritomb inhabits. The keystone was donated by the Orbo mine, but it isn't revealed why it was donated, nor what Spiritomb subsequently did at Sea Mauville. I've heard some suggest that Spiritomb made everyone gloomier, which is consistent with Spiritomb's abilities Pressure and Infiltrator, but there's no other evidence I can find that suggests why losing this keystone was deemed unforgivable. But it is confirmed that the company continued to receive letters even after Raisio was fired. That suggests that Raisio was too ashamed to ever let his son know what happened. Perhaps Raisio was so hurt and ashamed that he suppressed his memories. As does anyone else find it strange that he refers to this kitty doll as his son, and then says it's time to go home? This sequence is also reminiscent of Xena calling Wisma her daughter. But meanwhile, it appears that many of the other Sea Mauville workers were offered a lifeline to work for Stone and Dock. But the loss of the keystone was not the only incident that led to the cancellation of Sea Mauville. This note suggests that it was gym leader Watson who closed Sea Mauville as it was disruptive to Pokemon, similar to how New Mauville was closed for being disruptive too. Although it isn't clear how Sea Mauville was disruptive, we know that it extracts resources from the ocean, and that the Navy song describes these resources as great energy, that is likely referring to infinity energy, as Mr. Stone confirms that they have been developing infinity energy for quite some time, and we know infinity energy is sourced from Pokemon bioenergy. However, it's never clarified specifically how it is extracted. Mr. Stone may hint at the answer though at the end of the Delta episode, as he reflects on how they were able to stop the meteorite without a single loss. Perhaps I put too much faith in technology's promise alone. Perhaps my belief that the sacrifice of some might be necessary to guarantee the safety of many. Perhaps it was wrong all along. He could just be referring to the staff firings to maintain an efficient work culture, or most likely he was referring to how he changed his opinion on the meteorite needing to be sent to an alternate universe. Or he could be referring to something much more sinister in relation to how infinity energy is extracted, which could relate to what they were doing at Sea Mauville. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. Ultimately though, much like the Delta episode and the Team Magma or Aqua plot, Sea Mauville asks whether sacrifice is necessary for peace and human advancement. But it also yet again demonstrates how a work-and-life imbalance is not only dangerous for your family but for yourself. But all in all, this game has some of the best post and side game content in the whole franchise. The only thing that is missing is a post-game battle facility. Junichi Masada explained that the Battle Frontier wasn't included as they thought only a small portion of the player base would have used the feature. as they thought people were less likely to grind for the battle frontier considering all of the other modes of entertainment available these days. Not investing resources into something that wouldn't have been played much is sound reasoning, but I think it's fair to say that they got that assessment wrong, and their argument that they didn't add the frontier since it wouldn't have been engaging enough for this generation is somewhat contradictory, as the variety of modes that the battle frontier offers would have been much more engaging than the repetitive battle mason. The lack of gym leader rematches is likewise disappointing, considering you can rematch other trainers around the region, although it was cool to run into a few of them in the postgame. But overall, while the lack of an engaging battle facility is a glaring flaw, I don't think it should detract from all of the other features that Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire nails. It has the best online functionality in the franchise. ORAS also has the best lower screen interface and Pokédex features in the franchise, and it has the most side game content and pathways for a trainer in the franchise, with contests, secret bases, legendary catching, and the trick house. Yet, it is one of the most underdiscussed and underappreciated Pokémon games in the franchise. This may just be due to there not being much controversial to discuss, aside from the lack of the battle frontier, and it doesn't have the most interesting story or difficult battles that, like X and Y, makes the game a lot more forgettable. But unlike X and Y, ORAS offers so much side content to complement the main story, and it also fixes many of X and Y's problems, such as Mega Evolution's role and implementation. The region was also much more enjoyable and easy to travel through, with the less frequent rival meetups and the ability to soar, as ORAS utilizes the 3D world and the cinematic cutscenes to express Hoenn's vibrant nature, as Hoenn is not a bland region as I originally suspected. It's vast and abundant in hidden areas. The region also complements the story's focus on nature versus human development, through showing examples of towns that live peacefully with nature, and other developments like Rusov Tunnel and New Mauville that was shut down because they were negatively affecting Pokemon. While the story of C. Mauville and the Man with No Power demonstrate the human cost of protecting nature ahead of people's jobs and livelihoods. Ultimately though, the greatest challenge for Pokemon remakes is to carve their own identity without disillusioning the original fans. The Kanto remakes and BDSP struggled to differentiate themselves from the originals, as they were very faithful and did not take many risks, whereas ORAS ensures that the remake has a separate identity from the originals through the redesigns and the additional story. Yet this separate identity hasn't required disillusioning the original fans, as they haven't really changed the structure of the story or the original region design. Instead, they've just expanded upon the already existing themes or areas through adding depth and nuance to Team Aqua and Magma and transforming the generic abandoned ship into a lore-filled area that gives returning players new mysteries to discover. And that's how Pokemon remakes should be approached. Not as remakes that focus on replicating the originals, but as re-editions that reimagine the original story.